For the best listening experience, we recommend, and we actually ask everybody just stay on mute. There is a chance for folks to ask questions or comment on things during the presentation, so that's when you can clearly unmute yourself, but just keep yourself muted. Similarly, speaking of questions, you'll notice that chat function on the bottom. If you have one, feel free to ask it, whether if you wait for it for the end or during the presentation, that's fine. In terms of like the best view, we recommend doing the speaker view, and then you can find that on the upper right corner of the screen. And if you have any issues during this program, let us know, particularly let Satya know. You see Satya's name on the screen there, and you'll be able to get some support. Let's go to that next slide. We have live captions as an option, so if that's something that is your cup of tea or something you need, just follow the prompts when you see them on screen and you'll be able to get that. So on the next slide, we'd like to give a shout out to all the folks who have helped us get to where we are today. First and foremost, our sponsors. We thank Molson Coors, Southwest, and TIA for helping to fund this great content that we're bringing you here today. And also, particularly, we have a great group of folks who've come together to be our Virtual Voices Planning Committee. So you can see their names on the screen here, and you also will see some of them as hosts, as facilitators, as participants joining the conversation today. So a huge shout out to all the folks on the screen and also to our sponsors. So again, if you've attended a Virtual Voices before, you are probably familiar with these guiding principles, but I think it's important to revisit these. It's not always easy to have some conversations that we have, and so it's just helpful to kind of be grounded in principles, in values, and just the ways that we want to show up for the collective space. So here are 5, right? Assume and bring good intentions. Listen with curiosity for new understanding. Expect and accept a lack of closure. Sometimes we're often waiting for that golden answer that's going to help solve all of our problems, and that doesn't always come. So that's just something to keep in mind. And make space for mistakes, right? We can't be vulnerable if we're not making space for each other to make mistakes, right? And the last but not least is to acknowledge trauma and resist re-traumatization, right? We're not trying to trigger anyone during this conversation and just resist the urge to add to re-traumatization, right? So actually on the next slide is what I get to do a great introduction here. I shouldn't have said great because now I've set expectation this is going to be the most amazing introduction. But the person herself is amazing, so that hopefully will do it justice. But today's conversation is centering around practicing inclusive leadership. And moderating today's topic is Kirsten Vermeulen, Interim Executive Director at the Denver Metro Chamber Leadership Foundation. I've had the blessing and privilege of working with Kirsten also on the BCIPIC board and lots of partnership conversations with the Leadership Foundation. And I'm always impressed by the way she shows up and excited to see how she facilitates today's conversation with an equally amazing group of panelists. So without further ado, I'll kick it over to Kirsten to continue making introductions and facilitating today's conversation. Kirsten.
Thank you, Jason. Appreciate that and appreciate you, and so proud to partner with you in many ways. So today is the culmination of this year-long series, this journey that we have co-created for Virtual Voices between the Leadership Foundation and TIDE, as Jason mentioned. And for folks who are just dropping in on the series, we wanted to touch base really quickly on the ARC. The planning team that you saw, the illustrious planning team, has been so thoughtful about really shaping this journey. And so just wanted to remind folks how we got here today. The first couple of sessions were focused on the history of race and racism in the United States and Colorado. And then we really took a deep dive in the role that race and racism plays in shaping our systems, housing, education, philanthropy. And then we showcased a couple of organizations that were really leveraging their work to drive change to address inequitable systems. And then the last 2 sessions, we focused on the individual, the role of the individual in leading change, really from the inside out. And we had just two of the most incredible national thought leaders that we are so lucky to have in our own backyard here in Colorado. So Dr. Brenda Allen focused a session on cultivating inclusive leadership. So really growing your self-awareness and cultivating your practice, your labor over time. And then Dr. Dwanita Mosby Tyler hosted a session on the role of allyship, what it is, what it isn't, how individuals can strategically leverage their privilege of all kinds for good and for systems change. And so that brings us today to our conversation. And the committee really wanted to take the next step and convene some leaders who walk the talk every day and are very committed to this work. And for them to share how they cultivate a practice of inclusive leadership, not only for themselves, but also for the organizations that they lead and the civic life that they lead. So if you were at any of those sessions that we described, would love to hear from you in the chat. Just drop a note, which sessions did you attend? And maybe if you remember a key takeaway that you'd like to share with the rest of the group, we'd love to hear from you. So next slide, it is my pleasure to introduce our first of three panelists. We have Fran Campbell. She's the CEO of the Asian Chamber of Commerce. She's a native of Denver, born to Filipino immigrants. She started her career in healthcare before moving to the position of President and CEO of the Asian Chamber. Concurrently, over the last 30 years, she has been an operating co-manager of Simsiman, a family enterprises. It's a small minority-owned business. And it sounds like they had a number of incredible community offerings over that tenure that she helped to design and lead. But she's also been very, very busy in her civic life. So for the last 14 years, she has been a Denver commissioner for both the Asian American Pacific Islander Commission and the Immigrant and Refugee Commission. And she's been active over many, many years in the Denver APIA community. She served as the officer of the Filipino American Community of Colorado and the Governor's Asian Advisory Council. So welcome, Fran. And next slide, our second community leader who has joined us today is Lori Rabinowitz, and she is CEO of the Denver Scholarship Foundation. Lori joined DFS as the CEO in December of 2017. I can't believe it's been that long, Lori. But prior to leading Denver Scholarship Foundation, she had executive and entrepreneurial roles in a couple of different ventures, including the Denver Center for Arts and Technology. She had a leadership consulting role with Rebound Solutions, and she also served 9 years in business development at 9 News. She has certainly a passion for community service and is absolutely a guiding force in all that she does. If you know Lori, you know she is a force. And she actively serves on a number of boards and committees throughout town. So she is active with the Rose Community Foundation, MSU Denver, CU Denver School of Business, Project Angel Heart, and she is a former board of the Denver Metro Chamber Leadership Foundation, board member and chair, actually, of the Leadership Foundation. So welcome, Lori. Thank you for being here. And the next slide, our final community leader here today is Savanay Chandrasekhar, CEO of Minds Matter Colorado. He has had an incredible life. He started his career here in Denver in the Chief Academic Office for the Denver Public Schools. He consulted in nearly 20 countries around the globe on creativity and innovation, and now serves as the first ever CEO, paid CEO of Minds Matter of Colorado. It's a college access mentoring organization with 100% success, helping bright low-income high schoolers earn acceptance to college with scholarships. And this, I will just pause. I love this so much, and it is so true. Savanay's personal soul goal is to promote equity and eradicate suffering through peace, love, and compassion. Welcome, Savanay. All right. So we're going to transition into a conversation. Each of these leaders has been invited because they model inclusive leadership. So when our committee convened and brainstormed, who can we bring to culminate this series to have a real honest conversation around inclusive leadership and the practice to live and walk that daily, these individuals came to mind immediately. So you're in for a treat. We wanted to start first by just framing the conversation. What sparked your personal commitment to this work? What helped to design your personal frame on what it means to lead inclusively? And so Savane, you certainly have identified this work over many, many years as a personal goal. And you've had a pretty extraordinary life. And I understand that has shaped your commitment to this work. And so wanted to start with you. Is there a defining experience of either privilege or injustice in your life that has shaped your commitment?
Yeah. Thanks, Kristen. Lovely to be here. So honored to be here with Fran and Lori, just incredible leaders in their own right. And so much I'm going to learn from you guys. I'm taking notes while you're talking. So, but nice to be here. I think the big thing for me, Kristen, was, being a first generation Indian American immigrant and moving here when I was 6 years old, actually from Saudi Arabia. And for a little while, we were living in Southern California on my mom's first year teacher salary, which in Southern California is not a lot anywhere in the country, but certainly wasn't a lot in Southern California at the time. And I remember wanting to go get a Big Mac meal, and that not being in the budget to be able to get a Big Mac meal. And just sort of okay, sort of unfair and not cool. And then getting on a plane, going to India, visiting my family, and coming out the gates at the airport in Delhi, and having a car with a driver and air conditioning, which was a big deal back then, right? That was taking us to my aunt's lovely marble floored flat, on the outskirts of town. And on the drive through central New Delhi, having a lot of folks coming and knocking on the windows and holding children and asking for money and alms. And I remember rolling down the window and going to give them a 5 rupee note or something. And everyone was like, don't do that. Don't do that. And I was like, why wouldn't I give them money? We have money. They need money. Just give it to them. And they're like, well, if you give one person money, then everyone will come asking. And I was like, I don't understand what the problem was. And so I didn't understand, that was my first sort of trying to reckon with how am I inside the window and not outside the window? In a country of 1.4 billion people, the likelihood that I'm inside the window and born to parents that could then emigrate to the United States is fractional. But that had nothing to do with me. I did nothing to earn that. I was, as Warren Buffett called, I won the ovarian lottery, right? I was born to the right parents at the right time. And that juxtaposition of those two experiences, what it meant to feel like I couldn't have what I wanted in the United States, and then to realize what true systemic inequity and abject poverty looked like in another country, just sent me in a tailspin when I was, 7, 8 years old. And my work has been grounded in trying to eliminate the systemic inequities on either side of that window. Being inside the air-conditioned car and being on the outside shouldn't be a result of your parents' birth.
The ovarian lottery. That is going in the notes. Thank you. Thank you, Savane.
So is Solgal. So.
Well, Lori, I know you are a student of leadership, but also I have learned by watching you over the years, and I know you're a teacher, overtly and just by your behaviors, right? How you show up in the world. Would love to get your perspective on what you feel others observe in your commitment to inclusivity.
Thank you, Kirsten. That's extremely generous. And I must begin by saying how incredibly humbled I am to be on a panel with Savane and with Fran. So thank you to the committee for the invitation. I've won a different lottery today. So thank you for the invitation to be here and to see everyone with us today, how much I've learned from all of you and continue to learn. I too am taking voracious notes, including Solgal and ovarian lottery. So I'm already learning. Thank you. So really it's important to us at Denver Scholarship Foundation that we co-create our culture. And what that means is that we live by our organizational values, which are leadership, learning, relationship, innovation, and equity. And that we intertwine those values into all that we do, so that we speak about we as we, And at the same time, we honor each individual's unique contributions to the organization itself, as well as the more than 6,000, close to 7,000 young people that we have the opportunity and are so blessed to work with every year through Denver Public Schools and our 31 college partners. So we learn from each other. I'm incredibly grateful to have the opportunity to learn from our colleagues, learn from our students, from our families, from our scholars. Our work is guided by student voice. And by virtue, it's important to us that then our work is guided by our colleagues. And so it's important to us that we acknowledge that words matter, that experiencing trauma and experiencing re-traumatization are elements of every conversation that are critically important for us to include and to acknowledge, that we alphabetize one another's names in crafting an email, so that we don't see a hierarchical indication of bias. So those are some of the ways, oh my gosh, my watch is talking to me. Those are some of the ways that we exemplify, I hope, within ourselves, the opportunity to continue learning from one another. And most importantly, that each of our colleagues feel valued and feel heard.
Lovely. Thanks, Lori. And Fran, welcome to you. Clearly, you've been tapped on the shoulder over decades. People see the leadership light in you. They see your commitment. Would love to hear from you as well. How do you define inclusive leadership? What have you been told others admire in the work that you lead?
Well, I thank you, Kristen, for introducing me. That was such a gracious introduction. And also as well to Lori and Savane. It is a pleasure to be on here with you. So when I was thinking about this question, I know that I have worked with some really great inclusive leaders. And I have also worked with some that weren't so great, that really were just looking to check the box. So when I look at the traits of inclusive leadership, you know, I look at the commitment to the duration of the project, or the event, or of the mission goal. Mm-hmm. And I'm also looking for the willingness to really lean in. I know that there's a certain amount of daring mixed with that, and there has to be a lot of humility, whether it's innate or acquired. And I define humility, you know, it's an understanding that I don't know everything. I certainly don't know everything. I am learning a lot today already. And part of that is knowing that the next person you meet will probably teach you something valuable, whether you want it or not. And the flip side of being, you know, like a curious lifelong student is that you also have to be a teacher, which means you have to be able to communicate and to instruct with empathy. That seems like a lot, but it, you know, the good leaders, the ones that I've worked with, have all of those traits.
I think we could end the conversation right there. That was so beautifully put. Thank you, Fran. So we do want to take it up a level. Part of our goal with this afternoon's conversation is to weave in some of the insights and the lessons learned of the last couple of sessions. So we talked about the role of cultivating inclusive leadership individually and in organizations and allyship. And that change happens most dramatically at the organizational level. Each of you are organizational leaders. And in our session with Dr. Brenda Allen, she really challenged participants to understand and make the case in terms of bringing others along, why inclusion matters in their organization, what it will look like to operationalize within those organizations. And so want to hear from each of you, if you're willing. How do you personally make and sustain the case for inclusive leadership with the organizations that you lead?
So I can jump in on this one.
Yeah, go ahead, start with you, Saw. Thanks. Mm-hmm. This
seems like it's improvisational. We planned out who's going to answer each question at what time. So I'm going to let you in on the secret, folks. But I think so. The first way is by stealing from very, very smart people and learning from others, right? So I'm going to take this from Melody Hobson, who's the CEO of Ariel Investments. And if you've never seen her TED Talk on being color brave instead of color blind, I strongly recommend it. But she talks about this. So she works in a financial capital firm, and I think about this, right? She's like, if Savanay, if I took all of the money that Minds Matter Colorado had in our bank account and then put it all and bought a bunch of gold with it and kept it in a trunk, my board would probably fire me very, very quickly, right? Because that's not a very smart decision. What we found, if you guys don't know this, what we found over and over again is the best way to increase your returns and reduce your risk, make more money and lose less of it, is to diversify, right? So put a little in gold and a little in stocks and a little in bonds. And many of you have done that with your own retirement savings. That's the best way. Not only do you get more money out of it, but you are less likely to lose money. It's one of these miracles of modern financial science. But when it comes to the workplace, when it comes to community, when it comes to civic engagement, when it comes to leadership, a lot of times we don't diversify, right? We put a bunch of our resources in gold. And it's interesting to me how we don't translate, the fact that diversification reduces risk and increases reward in many facets of life, not just the financial arena, right? And so thinking about that, right? Like when I think about this within Minds Matter, one of the clear examples for this for us is our work was based in Denver for 15 years and has been for a long time. Every Minds Matter chapter around the country is based in a home city. But in doing that, what we're doing, we have 100% success rate helping students from Denver get into college with scholarships. But there are students across the state of Colorado that are suffering from geographic and regional inequity, right? They don't have access to programs like Minds Matter in those communities. And so not only are we as an organization doing a disservice, that's the reason I want to go do this work, but more importantly, like as a community, as an economy, there are thousands, hundreds of thousands of lived experiences outside of Denver Metro and outside of the Front Range that we don't have access to, and we don't have insight. What are we losing? What risks what are we risking, right? And what rewards are we losing out on by not being fully inclusive in our community and in the work that we're doing? So that's why we set a vision to serve every student corner to corner across Colorado. And we've started expanding across the state, is because we know that Colorado will be a stronger, higher reward, lower risk economy and community. We will be better in all of our outcomes if we have more lived experiences in the room. And that's how we think about it.
Brave and bold. Absolutely. Lori?
I'm going to springboard off of Savanay's highlight of lived experience, because it's very important to us, and we say regularly, and again, critically important that we honor this, that lived experience is expertise. And so we know that having every voice around not only every voice around the table, but ensuring that we're welcoming and inclusive of every voice around the table, that we honor that voice and that we are communicating in a feedback loop, that I mentioned earlier that our colleagues feel heard. Well, it's most important that we are listening to our students, that we are listening to our families, to our scholars. Our scholarship at Denver Scholarship Foundation is intentionally a promise-based scholarship, which means that every individual Denver Public Schools student who meets the broad eligibility requirements, with thanks to our partnership with Denver Public Schools, our partnership with our 31 college partners, and with incredible organizations like Savanay and Minds Matter, gives us the opportunity to bring that inclusive approach, that equitable opportunity to all students, as opposed to a traditionally competitive process. And so it's important to us that we are inclusive of everyone's voice, and that we leverage those voices and those lived experiences as expertise in the discussion, because we always make better decisions when we have everyone's influence and insight, alongside continuing to outreach and ensure that anyone who isn't around the table, which we know we're always missing voices, that we are intentionally outreaching and connecting.
Thanks, Lori. Excellent. And Fran, I know you could speak on behalf of a number of organizations and institutions and councils that you help to lead, but from your perspective, pick any one area in which you're leading in your life. We'd love to hear from you too. Thanks.
Well, let me talk about the Asian Chamber of Commerce. You know, our mission is to provide culturally competent economic development and business opportunities for our members, and we also advocate and support the Asian American Pacific Islander business and cultural community. So just saying all of that may sound like, oh, they're inclusive. They've got to be inclusive. But that's a trap that we have to be careful about. Just because we are within an ethnic minority community, that does not mean we are inclusive. We work at the Asian Chamber with a huge diversity of communities. You know, there's over 40 Asian American Pacific Islander ethnic communities in the metro area. There's hundreds of languages, multiple religions, different immigrant stories and experiences. And so our challenge has always been to establish paths of connections between these communities and our corporate members and our sponsors and government agencies. And that's where the word inclusive comes in, is to be sure that even though we may sound inclusive, that we really include all of those pieces. And I found that, especially during these last few months of COVID and anti-Asian hate, that inclusion, it's really a long process. And I mentioned it before, it's, especially now, it's not just a check the box definition.
Yeah. And I wonder, Fran, would you be willing to share any lessons learned on that journey over time from the Chamber's perspective?
Personal? Well, you know, what I did learn that, because when I came into this position, I actually came into my position as CEO of the Asian Chamber after working 17 years in mental health. You know, and I thought after working 17 years in mental health that, oh, I understood everybody. Well, obviously I didn't. Because when I did come into the chamber right before COVID started, all of our goals changed. Everything that, all of the procedures and policies that we were following when I came in went out the window, and we had to do everything different. And I think because of the inclusion that we had, not just with our community, but with our members and partners and sponsors, that we were able to make something new. And the Asian Chamber is new. We're doing things different than we have for the last 35 years. Yeah, and I'm really glad to be a part of that. It's just, I didn't realize that that's what was going to happen after COVID, but yeah.
Well, and we would love to share some of the work that each of your organizations is leading in some of the follow-up. So think about opportunities to engage this audience directly. And certainly, Fran, I know our organizations have collaborated in the past, but those ties sometimes get frayed in crisis. And so if we can rekindle that and help our community understand the work that you're leading and cross-pollinate where possible, that would be wonderful. So we're going to shift to the next theme. We talked a little bit about Dr. Tyler's recent presentation on allyship, and she defined it by an ally combining or creating resource and privilege with another for mutual benefit. I'm going to repeat that. An ally is defined as combining or creating resource or privilege with another for mutual benefit. Does that ring true for y'all? And if so, are you willing to share an example where someone has offered effective allyship for you or your organization? And we can popcorn on that, but anyone's willing to take it?
Well, I could go ahead and start because it kind of segues from what I was just talking about. You know, I was born and raised here in Denver, and I've always questioned, and of course, when I was a teenager, I totally doubted that there are any allies for my AAPI community. You know, not just tolerance of us, but true arm-in-arm allies. But I realized during the summer of 2020 that my community and myself, we do have a lot of allies. You know, the incidences of anti-Asian hate and bias and violence that escalated here in the Denver metro area. It wasn't just outside of our state, it was also here. And it actually started as far back as December 2019, when COVID was still just known as Corona and before the shutdown. But when that all started happening, the Asian Chamber and our community, we had a stunning abundance of support. It was amazing, from individuals and corporations and nonprofit and community leaders. You know, the chambers, not just the minority chambers, but yes, the Denver Chamber, Colorado Chamber, and chambers across the state offered their support. You know, we heard from the African American community, the LGBTQ, the Jewish, and even the adoption community, which I volunteer with. And we had allies from the senators, you know, the Governor Polis, the mayors of Denver and Aurora, and other elected officials. And when I say by ally, you know, they didn't just add their voices to ours. You know, they helped us set up conferences and rallies, public rallies. Denver City Council wrote a proclamation condemning the violence. And Governor Polis, he signed into law the Colorado State Law SB 21280, you know, which basically makes it easier to indict for hate crimes. Corporations, our corporate members, they had intentional Asian American Pacific Islander DEI trainings for their employees and boards. Law enforcement at Denver and Aurora, they set up processes for our victims to report their crimes. And gosh, we were in the media so much, you know, podcasts and TV and radio. You know, this was really in abundance for sure. And these are allies that made our voices louder. And I think it also reminded everybody that to reject the stereotype of Asians, you know, kind of being blindly obedient and reticent. And I've been very, very personally grateful for this.
And hopefully the relationships that you've built will sustain that allyship over time, right? Sometimes it does take a crisis, but thank you for sharing. Mm-hmm. My internet's a little unstable, so I'm going to turn my camera off for a minute here, but we'll keep the conversation going. Savane, so you are very familiar with Colorado Civic Union values. And our definition of leadership, one of those 5 values, is giving up power to get things done. Beautifully within the frame. If you have an example of power sharing that has created beneficial.
Did anyone else lose Kristen on that one?
Yeah.
Okay, we lost your audio a little bit. This is the good news about prepping the questions in advance, is I can tell you the question that Kristen was going to ask me, which was, in light of like Colorado Civic DNA's values, one of them is in leadership, right? And one of the things that we talk about in leadership is giving up power to get things done, right? And so I think she was asking me a question about when I've done that in order to be able to create some beneficial results. And, you know, I think, especially in the context of virtual voices, I think a lot of times we have conversations and we sort of, when we talk about equity or we talk about diversity, I don't know about y'all, but I'll be honest, like the first thing that comes to my mind is racial equity, right? But it's an important thing, especially in the organization space, right? And especially in nonprofits and businesses, to be thinking about gender equity and sexual identity and all these other elements and facets of identity that sometimes invariably take a back seat, right? And so I have a teammate that I brought on who, and she's absolutely incredible. And we brought her in as a VP level. And as she was with us for the first year and a half, I realized that like this person is not only the person who will take over for me once I leave, but is also like, will make the organization better if we are co-leading the organization, right? So instead of being a CEO and a VP of operations or curriculum or programming, we realized that the organization would be more effective if we were both co-chiefs, right? And so about a year ago, I haven't talked about this much, but about a year ago, year and a half ago, in front of our board, our budget was still pretty tight. We were coming into COVID and we had a lot of uncertainty. So it wasn't easy to just sort of promote her up and adjust her salary accordingly. So this was one of those situations where I specifically decided, like, I'm going to take a pay cut. I'm going to allocate my salary over to her, and we can co-lead this organization because we need to be seen as equals, not only in the community, but also internally. We need to feel comfortable that we are doing this. So that was a very discrete set of resources that we then sort of allocated and built out. And that was a perfect example of, in quote unquote, giving up. What we created was an incredible leader, the best year we had in spite of a global pandemic for Minds Matter in many ways, students going to Harvard and Yale for the first time. And my workload shifted and I got to focus on the things that I was more effective at. And then Kate was able to focus on the things that she was more effective at, right? And so that was one of those really discrete examples where, yes, the numbers in the bank accounts changed a little bit, but the benefit to me was disproportionate. And the benefit to the organization was disproportionate, and the benefit to Kate was disproportionate, right? And to our students, most importantly, was disproportionate. So this was absolutely one of those situations where giving up power, resources was better for everyone. And I would do it again 99 times out of 99.
Okay, we just need to pause for applause. Thank you, Savane. That's an incredible story. It's a great segue to our next question, which I believe, Lori, you are teed up to volley. Wanted just to recognize, yeah, please, no, yeah. So I'll frame it up real quick and then hand it over to you, as long as I don't lose my internet again, but you're equipped, I know. So each of you is in roles of positional leadership, and Sop just shared an example of sharing positional power, but also want to hear a little bit from you, Lori, specifically about how you mentor others who may not have formal leadership roles to advance inclusivity in informal ways.
I really appreciate what both Fran and Savane just shared, both about amplifying voice and giving up power, and the importance of the way in which those two come together. We can say all day long, and our co-panelists have shared this as well, we're inclusive, we've decided we're inclusive. Well, we don't actually decide that we are inclusive. It is our partners in this work, our colleagues, that share with us if we have an inclusive, welcoming community of belonging within our organization or not. And so it's giving up power in a way that empowers others, which certainly aligns with what Savane just shared. And we've been fortunate over the last year at Denver Scholarship Foundation to immerse ourselves in what started as a compensation study around pay equity and has now emerged into what we are calling DEEP, which is the Denver Scholarship Foundation Employee Experience Program. Because every day is an experience, every part of our work is an experience. And how can we collectively improve upon our individual experiences within the organization? And so in order to do this work, we started with quite a bit of research, but more importantly, we launched the work out of our all employee survey. And we looked at the areas where we had opportunities for improvement, and we focused there. And those were career growth, compensation, and professional development. And so out of those, we then established a number of different internal teams to invite their participation and opened it up to what we call our Imagine sessions at Denver Scholarship Foundation, which is every employee's involvement in what they see as most important and most influential within the organization. So it has led now, after about a year, to a fully comprehensive program that we just launched actually this morning with our colleagues that focus on our compensation program, our career development programs, our well-being and workplace flexibility, and our rewards and recognition. And it was created, we talk a lot about co-creating. And so to be able to actually demonstrate that everyone's input is influential and everyone's voice matters in this process and in determining the trajectory of our work. To be able to launch it in a way that everyone who was involved got to see their pieces and parts throughout was really exciting today.
Congratulations.
Are you hiring? Yeah.
We are. DenverScholarship.org.
Very, very, very good. Thanks, Lori. All right, we are closing the formal portion of our questions here today. So want to make sure that folks are thinking about some questions that they would like to pose for our amazing community leaders. The final section that we're going to talk about is around the actual practice. So today's conversation was titled Practicing Inclusive Leadership. We know that is a commitment over time, as Fran mentioned, right? This is a lifelong investment of your growth of others, proving, bold, humble curiosity over many, many years. So we would love to hear about how you foster that as a culture in your teams, how you go about surrounding yourself with diverse perspectives, and how you actively solicit candid feedback so that you can stay intellectually humble and learning in this growth over time. And who would like to go first?
I'll go first. I can give a stab at that. I think what's really important in any kind of organizational leadership is that the leader has to check their own biases. I've had to check my own biases. And in the work that I do with the community that I work with, checking biases means adjusting to language differences, but it's not just language differences, it's also cultural. We have to understand historical discrimination and priority needs, generational and gender attitudes, and in my community, of course, level of acculturation. So the approach that we have used really is letting go of a lot of expectations. I have had to, this was a personal bias of mine, we have to let go of the expectation of proper grammar and pronunciation. We have to let go of the expectation of proper mannerisms, whatever those are. We have to avoid patronizing speech and condescending remarks. Even going to the very basic of human interaction, we have to check ourselves whenever we reject the smells and the sights and the sounds that we're unfamiliar with. And we also have to do a lot of homework. So when we work in the community and expect our community to be inclusive, of course, our organization has to be inclusive, but that starts with me. I've had to really, really work hard on checking these biases that I've had, even though I thought I didn't, but I did. So it's a lot of personal work as well.
Thank you, Fran, for sharing that insight and being so vulnerable as I start to think about the answer to this question as well. I echo what you just shared about continuing to check personal biases. I was lucky enough that my ovarian lottery landed me in New Mexico in a multicultural community growing up, my entire upbringing, my college experience, the start of my career. And in my mind, that was everyone's experience. And I came into my work at Denver Scholarship Foundation, where the majority of our colleagues are professionals of color, thinking grew up in a multicultural environment. All of my influences are from other cultures other than my own, and other religions and faiths and lived experiences. And daily, not even multiple times over the course of my day, I have to ask, am I approaching something in the most respectful way that I can, in the most inclusive way that I can? And I'm so immensely grateful and honored by the relationship of our colleagues who say no or yes. given something that either perhaps a colleague has experienced themselves, or maybe has experienced in oftentimes in carrying trauma from a student perspective, those insights not only help our organization to be stronger, but also create a different opportunity for that power piece that we talked about earlier, and that individual empowerment. I'll share a very, very quick story. During the course of COVID, of course, as I think we all had the opportunity to explore new and interesting ways to connect at a time that we were all physically disconnected. And so we started having a number of different opportunities to create space for conversation, space for tears, space for learning. And after the insurrection in January, I was paralyzed. I don't have a better word. And oftentimes I was calling for space and creating space. And one of our colleagues outreached, we use Microsoft Teams, as many others do, I know, outreached and said, we need to create space to talk about what happened. And that was a moment for me thinking about, I hope we're creating an inclusive environment. I hope we're empowering one another in ways that are meaningful. And for our colleague to say, this is what I need, and this is what we need, was something that, again, I continue to learn from our colleagues every day, alongside checking my own biases and recognizing that this is a learning journey, and to be a part of a learning community is an exceptional gift.
And the fact that you created a space safe enough that people are willing to give you that feedback to co-create is really powerful too. Yeah. Over to you, Savane.
Super powerful examples, Fran and Laurie. Thank you for sharing. I think the point is, this isn't instinctive, right? It's not natural. It doesn't necessarily need to be hard work, but I think it does need to require some reckoning, right? I think when I think about my own sort of personal journey, how do I create a culture of feedback? And so much of it is my internal work as a leader, my self-reflection, and how I'm showing up. And a huge part of that has been my own sort of evolutionary and emotional and spiritual journey, and processing so many of the micro annoyances and microaggressions I might still hold on to, and the biases that I probably hold, that I know I hold, and the triggering emotional experiences, and taking the time to process those. Because the more for me, I found that the more I can process those, and the more that I don't then spark those onto other people when they ask me another question that might be triggering, right? The more it allows me to create room for mistakes, like we talk about as one of our norms here in Virtual Voices. The more I can create that space, the more authentic the conversation can be, the more I am not triggered, and the more I can come from an objective experience to both empathize with the other person and figure out where we have shared values and shared meaning and move forward together. And so much of my work has been about processing my own internal emotional experience of being a person of color, and knowing that my work, that burden is mine to carry, and it's not fair for me to throw that on other people as well, when they're trying to process their own experiences. So processing my own experiences has been incredibly powerful, and I think just sort of innately makes me more receptive to conversations where perspectives that may be completely oppositional to mine can be shared, and we can come together, process with respect for each other's humanity, and move forward in a collaborative and productive way.
Thank you, Savane. I really wish we were in person, because I would run to each of you for a hug of gratitude. COVID safe, side hug if needed, with a mask on. But I really want to thank you for sharing your insights in your journey today, but also showing up and being vulnerable and talking about the inside work, which is ultimately what we've been talking about this entire series. It starts with the individual if we want to create systems change, and just appreciate you all for modeling that and pulling back the curtain and allowing us to learn from you and with you. I am going to pass it off. I'm going to say one last chance for a question. If anybody has a question in the audience. If not, I'm going to ask you to come on camera and join me in showing your gratitude for our panelists today. Thank you. You have a question. We have a question.
Yeah.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
I have a question and a comment. I just want to say thank you so much. By the way, my name is Ola Kukoyi. I work with the City and County of Denver, and I run a program called New Americans Integration Network, which is to help New Americans integrate into the American society. Really talking about New Americans, we're talking about foreign born. Either you're a foreign born or you have a parent who is foreign born. So I really, what you've been sharing really resonates with me. And I really just want to give a big shout out to Frank Campbell and Savini for talking about the way of leadership and how to help people appreciate their differences and uniqueness, which is something that I have a hard time dealing with. People just want you to talk like an American, and they don't really appreciate you when you do talk with a different accent. They think you're stupid and dumb. So I really appreciate that fact, that making sure that everyone is accommodating of everybody's uniqueness. So I just wanted to put it out there, but I also want to say, Savine, how did you feel, or how was it for you growing up in with a family that is New American and also trying to integrate into the system, and not also being able to overcome that pressure that you have to assimilate, not integrate?
Thank you, Olaf, first of all, for the work that you do and for that lovely question. I was just about to type an answer in the chat, so I'm glad you asked it. The answer is, it wasn't this sort of like smooth, elegant work of figuring out my identity. It was very pendulum, right? So when I moved here when I was 6, everything I was trying to do was to be as American as possible, which I now know means as white dominant culture as possible, right? So speak a certain way. I was the best speller in my class because I studied words to make sure that I wouldn't get things wrong, so that people couldn't question me on my English, right? I worked on my pronunciation, my gestures, my nonverbals. I did all of the things, and I actually pushed away so much of my culture in that process. And it's only been in the last 10 years, and really in the last 3 years with my wife, who's now on as well, who's a white American, but is so loving and inquisitive and curious about my Indian heritage, that has given me space to now dive in with both feet, right? And cook Indian food at home, and watch Indian movies and listen to Indian music. And so I'm still working on it. I don't have a great answer. I'm quintessential third culture kid, right? Not Indian, not American, trying to figure out my way in the middle. And I've bounced against both sides all the way through. And I've had a lot of shame about where I've been on that journey my entire life, and I'm still processing it through it. But I think it's a journey that many of us who are immigrants to the country share. And I appreciate you asking me the question to give me space to talk about it, because I think it's in sharing these lived experiences that we can have community healing and community progress.
Sorry, as a follow-up to that, I just put my email address in. I would love to reach anyone to reach out to me. This is a conversation that I believe it's ongoing. Please, let's talk about it. Reach out to me. And what you just experienced is what a lot of New Americans are experiencing. We tend to throw away our culture and our uniqueness as we try to assimilate because of the pressure that is putting on us to assimilate. So please feel free to reach out to me. I'd like to continue this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ola. I will.
Thank you, Ola. Yes, this is not the end of the conversation by any means. And thank you for that question. And thank you, Savini, for sharing. I'm going to pass it off to Monica to close us out for today.
Wow, I'm speechless, but I know that I can't be speechless in this moment. But I just want to thank you, Kirsten, for your masterful moderation of this conversation and this dialogue, and to each one of our panelists. Gosh, you blew me away. And I'm just feeling very overwhelmed with the information that you gave in a way that causes me to really think about, and I hope the others that are participants here as well will start to think about and reflect on some of the examples that you gave. Very actionable, tangible, ways that you are showing up as inclusive leaders and really challenging, which first comes with our individual interrogation and self-awareness and self-reflection. And so much of what is required is for us to think about how we're showing up and how we're taking action to be inclusive, not to wait for people to come, but what steps do we take to create those environments and to reach out and to bring others in? I mean, you all really gave us a wealth of tools and gems that we can apply today. We don't have to wait to apply them. We can apply them today. And this planning committee, I'm just going to let you know, like, this is the mic drop we were hoping for. This is the mic drop for the year that I believe was necessary and needed. And so we couldn't have done it without all of you. And I'm so pleased to have been a participant in shaping what we've done this year and created in partnership with the Leadership Foundation. And I cannot be more thrilled with the way that we can look at where do we go next for 2022? Where can we go? There's nowhere but up. But I can't thank you all enough for sharing your heart, your life experiences, and the way that you're showing up today. You were the premier examples of what we're talking about. And so thank you, thank you, thank you. I can't thank you enough. And so I will add just a few comments, at least around what's coming up next. First of all, Impact Denver applications are due November 22nd. So anyone that wants to participate in some of the programming that the Denver Metro Chamber Leadership Foundation puts on for around development and really exercising civic DNA practices and really taking that exploration and self-assessment further, Impact Denver is a great program to participate in. Applications due November 22nd. The 9 News Leader of the Year applications are due November 30th. So for all of you, put your name in the hat for that. I've heard it's an awesome, amazing experience just to go through it, but we're looking for those applications. Impact Denver project proposals are due December 13th. So if you want to submit a proposal for Impact Denver participants to partner with you on, those are due December 13th. And then Tide is having a symposium starting in first quarter of 2022. So really keep an eye out for that. The programming that we've crafted for over the last 10 years has really been a game changer, I believe, for a lot of diversity, equity, inclusivity practitioners, HR professionals, and companies. Tide has about 75 plus member companies that are a part of shaping how we do this work and advance this work in our organizations. And so we hope that you'll be on the lookout for that symposium in first quarter 2022. And then stay tuned for the details on our 2022 Virtual Voices series. We really want to elevate the conversation. And so we'll be looking for input on where you think we should go next. And so thank you so much for your time. I know we're a little bit over, but congratulations for all of us that have created this platform and this space for dialogue and conversations. I appreciate you all. Thank you and see you next time. Beautiful.